Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Debt Collection 101 here on Our Bite You. We have a awesome, eventful episode here with the one and only John Bedard with Bedard Law Group. We're going to be talking about limited content messaging, topic that everyone has been talking about and is worried about and constantly asking about now, the new CFPB ruling. So we're going to do a little crash course on limited content messaging. John, for anyone watching that doesn't know who you are, if you give a little bit of background on yourself, go ahead.
Well, thank you. John Bedard here from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm with Bedard Law Group, which is a law firm, and we represent debt buyers, debt collectors, law firms, and we help them stay in compliance with the myriad of laws that they have to comply with. We also do the defense litigation for them. We're a certified RMA auditor, so we'll go in and we can do audits for them. We defend regulatory actions, and we've got several CFPB actions that we're defending right now. And so we focus our practice exclusively on the ARM industry, and we're here to help.
All right, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate it. Well, let's dive right into it. So what is a limited content message?
Well, look, the rules that the Bureau have just come out with have clearly and unambiguously addressed this decades-old problem of leaving voicemail messages for consumers, right? And the new rules define this thing called a limited content message. And this limited content message is a very specifically defined thing, and that's what we're going to talk about, because it must include certain information. It's allowed to include some other information, and it may not include anything else in order to be considered a limited content message. And so, Alex, let's go through what has to be in a limited content message. First of all, it's a voicemail. It's a voicemail only. It's not a text message, not an email. It's a voicemail for the consumer, not that a third party gets or for a third party, that contains the following pieces of information. It's got to include the business name of the debt collector, but there's a caveat to that. The business name of the debt collector cannot indicate that the company is in the debt collection business. And so, number one, business name of the debt collector, so long as the business name does not indicate that the business is a debt collection business. Number two, a request that the consumer reply to the message. So you can say, please return my call. Number three, the name of one or more people who the consumer can contact to reply to the message at the company. And four, the telephone number or telephone numbers that the consumer can use to reply to the message. Those are the required pieces of information in the message in order for it to be considered a limited content message. Now, the Bureau goes on to say, if you want, you can say a few more things in that message without changing the character of this message as a limited content message. And there are 4 additional things that you can include in a limited content message. The first one is a salutation, like, hello. The second one is, really, this is how detailed the rule is. The second one is the date and time of the message. So, today is November 17th at 2:48 p.m. You're allowed to say that. Suggested dates that the consumer can reply to the limited content message. So, we're available from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. You can say that and call me back. And then finally, a statement that if the consumer replies to the message, the consumer can speak to any of the company's representatives or associates. And so those are the 4 pieces of permissible information that can be included in the message as well. Now, if a voicemail message left by a debt collector contains those first required pieces of information, and then any or all of the allowed 4 pieces of information and includes nothing else, that message is a limited content message. And that's how the Bureau defines what a limited content message is. And there's some examples that the Bureau gives us on what a limited content message is. And I'll read them to you. This is Robin Smith calling from ABC Inc. Please call me or Jim Johnson at 1-800-555-1212. That's an example of a limited content message. That message contains only the required pieces of information. Now they give us another example that include the required pieces of information plus some of the other permissible pieces of information. And here's what that script looks like. Hi, remember the salutation? Hi, this is Robin Smith calling from ABC Inc. It's 4:15 p.m. on Wednesday, September 1st. Please contact me or any of our representatives at 1-800-555-1212 until 6 p.m. today or any weekday from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time. There you have it. Those are examples of limited content messages that the Bureau has created as a safe harbor for debt collectors to use when leaving voicemail messages for consumers. That's a long answer to your short question. What is a limited content message, right?
Very thorough. And that is the best explanation. I think that basically covers everything. So that was awesome. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And so now, is this going to be helpful to collectors, you think?
I do.
Yeah? So tell me why. Let's talk about that for a minute.
I just think it gives like a clear cut and dry example of what you can and cannot say. And I think that's super important because I'm asked that question all the time of, well, what do you think I should say? What do you have other people say? And here it is, written on paper. This is what you can do.
Black and white, cut and dry. Don't change it. It is what it is. This is what you can say. I agree with you. So it's very helpful to give debt collectors certainty. It's very helpful to give them comfort that they're not going to be held liable for violating the law if they leave this message. And I know that really benefits collectors in a great way. Now,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's talk for a moment about how the Bureau came up with this. Why is this a lawful message? Okay. Here's their explanation. These messages, there's another definition under the FDCPA called communication. And the word communication is specifically defined in the FDCPA. And that word requires the conveyance of information about a debt, okay? And so if the communication between a debt collector and a consumer does not include the conveyance of information about a debt, well, then it's not a communication under the statute.
Right.
Why is that significant? Well, there are certain portions of the statute that require debt collectors to make specific disclosures whenever they have a communication with the consumer, right? And we've all heard of those disclosures. We call it the mini Miranda, right? This communication is from a debt collector. Any information obtained will be used for that purpose, right? And so we've heard that 1,000 times. Every debt collector on the planet can recite it. And when a debt collector has a communication with a consumer, they're required to disclose this communications from a debt collector. Well, the problem is that when leaving a message for a consumer, identifying yourself as a debt collector has the potential to reveal to anybody who hears that message that somebody owes a debt. There could be a third-party disclosure that was not authorized by the consumer. So what the Bureau says is, look, let's create a message that does not convey any information about a debt, all right? Let's also create a message that satisfies other requirements of the FDCPA that obligates a debt collector to reveal their own identity when placing phone calls to consumers. So they come up with this limited content message, which adequately identifies the debt collector by company name and by individual collector, Robin Smith, and carefully omits any conveyance of information about a debt. It doesn't say we're calling about an account. It doesn't say we're calling about a debt or a past due obligation. It doesn't say anything like that. So this is the way the Bureau allows a debt collector to have a contact with a consumer without having a communication, which then triggers all these other things under the statute. You follow me?
Mhm.
And so that's how they come up with this limited content message, which is not a communication under the statute, and therefore it doesn't have to include the mini Miranda.
Cool. Now, I know you kind of touched on this before, but some agencies are worried that like recovery and collections in their name or the agency will put them at risk of consumers filing lawsuits because it signals that they are a collection agency. Is there any way to avoid this other than changing their name?
I think that's a legitimate concern because recovery, account, all those kind of words, at least a consumer could argue with a straight face that it could suggest that the company has some relationship to the business of debt collection. And so what's the solution for those companies? Well, the Bureau suggests a solution, and that is to use a DBA, a doing business as. And if a company adopts a DBA name, a doing business as name, and here's the important caveat, and also files it and registers it properly with your with the registering body of whatever state or locale that you're in, then the Bureau suggests that that is a solution for companies whose business name suggests that they're in the business of debt collection. And so that's a very important question that you asked, and it's very important that companies that do have names that suggest they're in the debt collection business take steps to either get a DBA, or it probably won't be more drastic for them to change their company name, but they could do that too. But they have to be very careful about how they approach that, because they don't want to be it would not be considered a limited content message if they left a message for a consumer using their business name, if their business name suggested they were in the business of debt collection.
So are there any safe words, I guess, to say in a business name?
Well, we know one safe one, right? ABC Inc., because that's the one they used in their example.
The first to get it.
But there's lots of business names that have nothing to do with collections,
Yeah.
and so sometimes they're family names, sometimes whatever. And so I don't think it'll be hard for people in the industry to look at their own company name and then make a pretty good judgment about whether or not their name needs further consideration. Yeah. I feel bad for all the companies that have been around for 30, 40, 50. There are agencies in the marketplace that have been around for nearly 100 years, generation after generation, and lo and behold, they have collections in their name, or they have some very clear notation in their name that indicates they're in the business. And I said, boy, that's, it's brand recognition. It's all kinds of things that are sort of hard to quantify when it comes to changing a name or, changing your branding. I hate that for those companies, but if they want to leave messages and have the kind of security that the Bureau is willing to provide, you got to fall into this regimen.
Yeah. You mentioned this a little bit earlier about the communication, like that this limited content messaging only applies to voicemails, phone call. That's it. It can't be used in emails, texts, or social media. Why do you think that they decided to either not, omit that or not allow it?
Well, So I'll tell you what they said, and then I'll tell you what I think. How's that?
Very good.
Here's what they said. They said, industry, there's a very narrow and specific problem that you have raised about leaving voicemail messages. And it's only about leaving voicemail messages. You complain about FODI, you complain about how to leave a message, you complain about being sued all the time because of these messages you leave. It's a very specific, narrow problem. And so the Bureau says, the only thing we're going to solve is that very specific, narrow problem. So we're going to give you some protection in this limited content message. And so therefore, we are not saying that this content also causes an email or a text message or a direct message or social media communications. It doesn't cause those contexts to be outside the definition of communication. We're only solving the voicemail message problem that we know exists, okay? And so that's their explanation for why they say it doesn't apply to all those other things. There's no such thing as a limited content text message. But now, if we think about the rationale for why the Bureau concluded that the limited content message is not a communication under the statute, because it doesn't have a conveyance of information about the debt, right? Why can't we make that same argument for a text message that includes only the information that's contained in the limited content message? Okay, fine. The rule doesn't specifically say we have protection under the rule for providing what I'll call a limited content text message, okay? But I don't think it's a far-fetched argument to argue to some court, Judge, communication requires the conveyance of information about a debt. We sent a text message to that consumer. It conveyed no information about a debt. And so although it falls outside the scope of the Bureau's rulemaking, it still falls outside the definition of communication. I don't think that's a frivolous argument.
Do you see them, making rules and changes for text messages or any other kind of like outreach down the line?
If there is an outcry for it by consumers or by industry, perhaps yes. If they really see a need in the marketplace or an abuse of consumers in that particular communication channel, there may be some future rulemaking on it. But these rules are pretty clear about the Bureau's position when it comes to using other communication channels in ways that consumers do not desire. And if a debt collector disregards a consumer's communication preference, or to say it a different way, if a collector ignores a consumer's choice of communication channel, the rules and the Bureau are pretty clear that the Bureau thinks that's a violation of law. The Bureau is giving consumers control of the communication channel. And when the consumer says, do not text message me, that's the end, that's game over. No text messages. And so whether there'll be a need for future rulemaking with respect to text messaging will probably really largely depend on what happens in that space and in that channel over the next year, 2 years, 3 years.
Now, with just the limited content message right now, do you foresee any challenges with the implementation of it?
Well, with implementation, I don't think so, because I think it's fairly simple to leave a message like that, right? And so we can train collectors to use the script. If we are using artificial voices, it's even more easy to get it right every single time. There's a caveat there to artificial voices about where you're leaving those messages, landlines, cell phones, things like that. That's a totally different conversation. But I think it's pretty easy, by and large, to conform a message to the text that the Bureau gives us. What I really question is how effective the message will be. Will consumers respond to those messages? You know, one of my criticisms of this limited content message and the Bureau's approach to it is that the Bureau spent an incredible amount of effort and money and time studying language of the validation notice. Remember that? And studying consumer response to language in letters and disclosure language. They convened focus groups of consumers and studied how their eyes read the paper. And I mean, you name it, they did a lot of studying. And so they did a lot of empirical data study on the effect of disclosures and words on consumers when it came to the validation notice and other disclosures, but not with the limited content message. And so I ask myself, are consumers really going to respond to this thing? Maybe it would have been helpful to convene some focus groups to ask consumers, if you got this message at home from a company you never heard of, would you call it back? I mean, would you call back or not? And if 96% of consumers said no, then would it really be a good idea to make this rule at all? I don't know the answer to that, but I didn't see the Bureau doing the kind of study and in-depth analysis of the effect of this message on consumers, like they were so concerned about the words of disclosures and validation notice effect on consumers in those areas.
Well,
Yeah.
I see this message too as kind of like the curiosity killed the cat kind of a situation, where if you have a message that's from ABC Inc., okay, who's that? You're gonna look it up just because the curiosity gets the best of you, and I think that's where it falls in line of like these reputable agencies that have been around here for 20, 30, 40 years. They're starting from scratch with their reputation, whereas like a new fresh agency can have a good online presence like right away.
Yeah, yeah. But here's the irony of it. Because I agree with you. This is going to cause a lot of consumers to say, "Hey, let me Google ABC Inc. What is that?" Right?
Mhm.
And they can see that there was a telephone number left in the message. And so when they Google ABC Inc. and they see ABC Inc.'s website and the phone number matches, they can have a really good conclusion. Hey, that's the company that just called me. And lo and behold, what does their website say? We're debt collectors.
Exactly.
Exactly what the limited content message was not supposed to say, right?
Right.
And so, look, we have to appreciate the Bureau's effort to solve what was been a very difficult problem for the collection industry for many, many, many years. Well, they solved it. Whether it's going to be effective or not, I guess only time will tell. What I really hope industry does is they benchmark. I hope what industry does is they get a new block of phone numbers and they use that block of phone numbers in their limited content messages so that they can measure callbacks on the limited content message and compare it to the callback rates on the messages they previously left, right? I would love for industry to be benchmarking the effectiveness of the limited content message. And I think you can do that by segmenting phone numbers.
Yeah, a lot of that's a good idea, and a lot of agencies I think that I've spoken to and just hear from have chose not to leave messages.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you think this is going to change that approach, or do you think that they're going to, because doesn't seem like it's changed it, I guess, from anyone that I've spoken to. And I'm curious.
Yeah.
You think it will?
So I always ask clients, what does your data tell you, right? Have you done any comparisons? Take very similar pieces of business, all right, and don't leave messages on one piece of business and leave messages on the other. And let's see what your callback rates are. Because a lot of people call back from a missed caller ID, right?
Yeah.
And so what are the callback rates? And what are the RPC rates on those? And so, we may learn that if it takes us 27 seconds to leave a limited content message, and we have collectors leaving 40, 50 of them a day, 60 of them a day, and we have 40 or 50 collectors doing that, we're like spending hours a day talking to answering machines. Well, what's your RPC rate on the piece of business that had no messages at all? Because we might actually be able to get 6 more RPCs a day if we left no messages, just because we're not spending all that time talking to answering machines, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I always ask clients to be analytical about making those decisions instead of making those decisions from their gut. Their data should tell them whether or not it makes any business sense to leave a message or not.
Right. With I found this kind of, you know, transparency is a big thing in collections, and the FDCPA like deceptive practices, and like the CFPB is saying don't tell people you're a collection agency when you reach out to them. So it's kind of ironic, I think. But do you think that this is going to create any more or less transparency in the way agencies are interacting with consumers at all?
Well, you know, to the extent somebody listens to the message and learns the identity of the company, then yeah, they know exactly who's calling them. So long as they're DBA, you know, let's talk about DBA for a minute one more time again. Once your company adopts a DBA, you really now have to propagate that DBA throughout the company. It's going to be on your website now. It's going to be your letters. I mean, it's a big deal to sort of change a company name like that. And so, I mean, to the extent the name that is left on the voicemail allows a consumer to do some research, which the Bureau expects will happen, then maybe it will provide a little bit more transparency. And maybe the fact that a consumer did not respond to that voicemail after learning, maybe after an investigation on who that caller was, maybe that will help drive some strategy. And so, you know, I think time will tell on what the impact of this limited voicemail message will be on consumers and on industry. It will be really interesting to learn another 6 months, a year, 2 years from now, whether or not industry is overall leaving messages or not.
Yeah, you're right. All right. Well, John, thanks so much. I appreciate you joining us. That was great information.
I am delighted for you to have me today. Thank you so much.
How can people get in touch with you if they want to?
Oh, that's a great question. J. Bedard at bedardlawgroup.com. Our website is www.bedardlawgroup.com.
All right. Thank you. And if anyone wants to reach out to John, get some more information on this, feel free. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks, Nick, for co-hosting, and we will see you all next week.
See you guys later.
See ya.